Greenland. For many people, this name immediately creates a very specific image: a land of ice, of snow, of silence, a place far away from everything familiar, remote, isolated, almost outside of history itself. But this image is deeply misleading. Greenland has never been empty, and it has never been unimportant. In fact, for thousands of years, this frozen island has quietly shaped human history, not through armies or empires, but through something far more powerful: geography. And geography, unlike politics, never changes. To understand why Greenland matters today, we first need to understand where it is. Greenland is the largest island on Earth. It lies between North America and Europe, between the Atlantic and the Arctic. It sits directly on the shortest routes between continents, routes that ships, aircraft, and missiles would later depend on. It is isolated, but it is also perfectly positioned. And throughout history, that position has made Greenland valuable, again and again. The first people. Long before Greenland appeared on European maps, long before nations argued over borders and influence, people were already living here. More than 4,000 years ago, the first humans reached Greenland. They did not arrive suddenly. There was no single expedition. Instead, people moved slowly over generations, following animals, ice, and seasonal changes. They crossed frozen seas from what is now northern Canada. These people were the ancestors of today's Inuit. To survive in Greenland, adaptation was not optional, it was everything. The Arctic offered no forgiveness, only understanding. The Inuit learned how to read the ice, its cracks, its movement, its dangers. They learned the migrations of seals and whales. They learned how to build shelters from snow, stone, and bone. Their lives followed the rhythms of nature: months of daylight, months of darkness, periods of abundance, periods of extreme scarcity. There were no cities, no written laws, no permanent borders. But there was balance. Knowledge was passed orally through stories and shared experience. For thousands of years, human life in Greenland existed in careful harmony with the environment. Greenland did not defeat these people. They adapted to it. The arrival of the Vikings. In the late 10th century, Greenland entered European history. A Norse explorer named Eric the Red had been exiled from Iceland. Exile was a serious punishment. It meant survival without support. Forced to leave, Eric sailed west in search of new land. What he found was Greenland. The land was harsh, the climate unforgiving. But Eric understood something important. If Greenland sounded dangerous, no one would come. So he gave it a hopeful name, Greenland, and people believed him. Viking settlers began arriving in small groups. They established farming communities along the southern coast, where conditions were slightly more forgiving. They brought European traditions with them: Christian churches, livestock, a belief that land could be owned, shaped, and controlled. For a time, it worked. At its height, Viking Greenland supported several thousand people. They raised cattle and sheep. They hunted seals. They traded walrus ivory with Europe. They saw themselves as part of the Christian world, connected to Iceland, Norway, and beyond. But Greenland was not Europe, and it would not become Europe. Life for the Norse settlers was extremely difficult. Winters were long and unpredictable. Farming was unreliable. Isolation was constant. Every supply ship mattered. Every failed harvest carried consequences. Unlike the Inuit, the Norse did not fully adapt to Arctic conditions. They held on to European customs. They focused on farming rather than hunting. They resisted changing their way of life. And slowly, the environment began to push back. Greenland did not reward stubbornness. It rewarded adaptation. The silent disappearance. By the 15th century, the Norse settlements were gone. There was no final battle, no dramatic collapse recorded in history, just silence. Historians believe several forces worked together. The climate cooled during what is now known as the Little Ice Age. Sea ice made trade routes unreliable. European demand for walrus ivory declined. At the same time, Inuit societies continued to adapt and survive. The Norse did not. They remained tied to European methods that no longer worked. Gradually, farms were abandoned, churches stood empty, communities vanished. Greenland returned to quiet. Colonial Greenland. Centuries later, Greenland was claimed again, this time by Denmark. Missionaries arrived, trading posts were established. Greenland became a colony. Traditional Inuit life was reshaped by European systems of trade and control. Economic dependence replaced self-sufficiency. For Denmark, Greenland was distant and largely ignored, remote, cold, quiet. But geography was already preparing the next chapter. World War and strategy. The 20th century changed everything. When Nazi Germany occupied Denmark in 1940, Greenland was suddenly exposed. The island could no longer rely on its colonial ruler for protection. The United States stepped in. Airfields were built, weather stations established, supply routes secured. Greenland became a bridge between continents. Aircraft flying between North America and Europe depended on these routes. For the first time, Greenland was no longer peripheral, it was essential. After the war ended, the United States did not leave. Instead, its presence expanded. During the Cold War, Greenland's position became even more important. The island lay directly between the United States and the Soviet Union. Missiles crossed polar routes. Radar systems scanned the Arctic skies. Greenland became part of a global system of nuclear deterrence. The Nuclear Age. In 1968, a U.S. bomber carrying nuclear weapons crashed near Thule Air Base. The accident was officially contained, but it revealed the dangerous truth. Greenland was no longer just ice and snow. It was a front line of global power. Its silence hid enormous risk. Modern Greenland. By the late 20th century, Greenland began to change again. Home rule was established. Later, expanded self-government followed. Greenlanders gained greater control over education, culture, and resources, but independence remained complicated. Denmark continued to provide financial support. Greenland stood between autonomy and dependence, between past and future. Greenland today. Today, climate change is transforming the Arctic. Ice is melting. Shipping routes are opening. Resources once locked beneath ice are becoming accessible. Rare earth minerals, oil and gas, strategic pathways. Once again, the world is paying attention. The United States, China, Russia, not to conquer Greenland, but to access it. Why Greenland still matters. Greenland controls access to the Arctic. It influences global trade routes. It hosts critical military infrastructure. It appears quiet, but it is not insignificant. History has shown this again and again. Greenland has been settled, abandoned, colonized, defended, and debated. It has outlasted empires, and once again, it stands at the center of global attention. Not because of one leader, not because of one decision, but because geography remembers, and Greenland remembers everything. If you enjoy calm, long-form history like this, you're welcome to subscribe to the channel. There are many more stories still untold. Beneath Greenland's ice lies something the modern world desperately needs: resources. Rare earth minerals are essential for modern technology: smartphones, electric vehicles, renewable energy systems. As ice retreats, these resources become accessible, and that has changed everything. For decades, Greenland's resources were unreachable, too cold, too remote, too expensive. Now, that is no longer the case. Mining companies are showing interest. Governments are watching closely, not to claim Greenland, but to ensure access. The Arctic is no longer just a frozen frontier. It is becoming an economic battlefield, and Greenland sits at its center. Beneath Greenland's ice lies something the modern world desperately needs: resources. Rare earth minerals are essential for modern technology: smartphones, electric vehicles, renewable energy systems. As ice retreats, these resources become accessible, and that has changed everything. For decades, Greenland's resources were unreachable, too cold, too remote, too expensive. Now that is no longer the case. Mining companies are showing interest. Governments are watching closely, not to claim Greenland, but to ensure access. The Arctic is no longer just a frozen frontier. It is becoming an economic battlefield, and Greenland sits at its center. In recent years, China has shown growing interest in the Arctic, not through military bases, but through investment, infrastructure, mining projects, scientific research. China describes itself as a near-Arctic state, and Greenland is part of that vision. The United States has taken notice. American officials have increased diplomatic presence. Military infrastructure has been modernized. This is not about confrontation. It is about positioning. In the modern world, influence does not always arrive with force. Sometimes it arrives quietly, through partnerships, through access, through long-term planning. Greenland has become part of that quiet competition. As global interest in Greenland continues to grow, a familiar assumption often appears that influence means control. History suggests otherwise. Greenland has repeatedly shown that strategic importance does not guarantee dominance. Foreign powers have arrived with plans, with infrastructure, with long-term strategies, yet the island itself has remained resistant to full control. Not through confrontation, but through conditions, climate, distance, local reality. Greenland operates on its own terms. It accepts presence, but rarely submission. This pattern has repeated across centuries, and it continues today. Greenland offers an important lesson about the modern world, that not every critical region becomes a center of power. Some become mirrors, reflecting global priorities, fears, ambitions. Greenland does not dominate global politics, yet global politics increasingly revolve around it. Climate change, resource access, scientific urgency, all converge here. In this sense, Greenland represents a shift in how influence is measured, not by population, not by economic output, but by position, by relevance, and by the questions it forces the world to confront. The future of Greenland is unlikely to arrive suddenly. There will be no single declaration, no dramatic turning point. Instead, change will come gradually, through agreements, through adaptation, through decisions made quietly. This has always been the Greenland way: slow transformation, measured responses. In a world driven by speed, Greenland remains an exception, a place where time still moves differently, and where the future arrives not with noise, but with patience. Greenland matters not because it seeks attention, but because attention eventually finds it. Throughout history, the island has existed at the edge of major transformations, often unnoticed, often underestimated, yet consistently present when global systems shift. As the Arctic continues to change, Greenland will remain a reference point, not as a decision maker, but as a measure of climate, of strategy, of restraint.